This meeting includes the remote participation of members as authorized under Minnesota statutes section 13D.021 due to the declared local health pandemic. Please keep yourself muted when you're not speaking. To keep the meeting on schedule, please wait your turn to speak and hold questions until the end of each speaker's presentation. If you wish to be recognized to speak, please raise your hand so that the chair can call on you. There is a chat function, but please remember that those who are calling in by phone cannot see the chat, and everything typed in the chat may be posted in the public meeting minutes. I'll do my best to verbally communicate relevant information that appears in the chat. Would encourage folks to share pertinent information verbally rather than relying on the chat. For participants who are on the phone, press *6 to turn your microphone on and off to make a comment or question. And as a reminder, these meetings are public and are subject to state's open meeting law. Under the state's open meeting law, all votes during an online meeting must be taken by roll call. This will require each member to activate their microphone to give their vote and then turn their mic back off. Finally, if at any time during this meeting you require technical assistance, please contact Kim for help at kim.havey, Havey, at minneapolismn.gov. Are there any questions? Seeing none, I will now call this meeting to order and ask Kim to call the roll so that we may verify the presence of a quorum. When Kim calls your name, please say present, but also introduce yourself briefly with your name and organization or affiliation as applicable. Kim, are you there? Kim might have dropped off.
Oh, this is Stacy, and while Kim gets ready to join us again, maybe I could do the roll call.
That sounds great. Thank you, Stacy.
Thank you. Yeah, I got knocked out there. So yeah, go ahead.
Hannah Bone.
Hi, Hannah Bone, present. Sorry, my infant son is making some noise in the background.
No worries. Max Dalton.
Present.
Indigo David Liu. Maron Demisi. Mark Denon.
Present.
Tess Dornfeld.
Present.
Divine Islam. Matthew Douglas May. Sandy Fazeli.
Here.
Lauren Fleming.
Here.
Maddie Henderson.
Here.
Leslie Jackson. Anna Johnson.
Here.
Toya Lopez. Barbara Lundy.
Present.
Nick Minderman.
Here.
Aaron Niehoff.
Present. And I guess go ahead and announce the results.
We didn't have. Did you call Suzanne?
No, not yet. I have two more.
Oh, two more.
Okay.
Sorry about
All
that.
right. Thank you.
Suzanne Savanic Hansen.
Present.
Jacqueline Zapita.
Here.
All right, thank you.
I obviously got too used to being the end of the roll.
Normally, I'm always you at the end. But so yeah, there is 13 members present, so we do have a quorum, and I see also Leslie is joining us as well, so I will count her as present.
Great.
Leslie, we're calling roll call.
Present.
Thank you.
So if you haven't guessed this already, I want to note that our meeting tonight is being staffed by Kim Havey and Stacy Miller of the City Sustainability Division. So thank you, Stacy, for helping out there for a few moments, and thank you for taking notes today. Now, before we dive in, I would like to give an opportunity for community members and others, such as city staff and presenters who have joined us today, to unmute themselves and briefly introduce yourself with your name and organization or affiliation as applicable. So I do not have the participant list up in front of me. Let's go with Audrey first.
Hi, I'm Audrey Partridge. I'm with Center for Energy and Environment.
Great. Thank you. Looking forward to hearing from you later. We already heard from you, Kim, so we're just going to skip you for now. Luke?
Hi, everybody. Luke Hollenkamp. I'm with the City Sustainability Office, and good to see you all tonight.
Joe Dammel?
Hey everyone, I'm Joe Dammel. I'm with Fresh Energy.
Mauricio Leone, and I'm really sorry if I murdered your first name.
Yeah, no worries. My name is Mauricio Leon. I'm a researcher for the Metropolitan Council. I'm also, outside of my role as a researcher at the Metropolitan Council, I'm also a member of EVAC. So really happy to be here today.
Thank you. Let's see. There's somebody in here who's listed as meeting guest. I don't know if anybody has that name in front of them. I'm gonna skip that for now. Trevor.
Hey everybody, this is Trevor Drake with the Great Plains Institute.
Fantastic. And then is there anybody else that I missed?
Toya Lopez.
Toya, were you not called during the roll?
Oh, I came in late, so.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you for announcing that you're here. Really appreciate it. Okay, with that, we will begin and proceed to our agenda, a copy of which was posted for public access to the city's legislative information management system, which is available at lims.minneapolismn.gov. Our first two items of business is the adoption of our agenda for tonight's meeting, followed by the acceptance of minutes for the November 17th meeting. And we can combine these two if somebody wants to make a motion to approve both. But first, are there any changes folks would like to make to the agenda or minutes? I don't know if the agenda on LIMS says this, but the version that I got from you yesterday, Kim, it says that our next meeting is going to be on January 26th. And so just making a note to edit that to say that our meeting is going to be January 25th.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, January 25th. Sorry, that was a typo.
No problem. Does anybody want to make a motion to approve the agenda with that minor change and the minutes as written?
Aaron, I'll make a motion.
Thank you. I did not see whose face that was.
This was Max. Sorry.
No problem at all. Just wanted to make sure that Stacy's at least getting the names down. Is there anybody who wants to second?
This is Sandy. Oh, go ahead.
We'll take Sandy's as a second. Kim, do you want to go ahead and call roll?
Yes, I will. Sorry, my working a little slow today. So here just a yay or a nay. Hannah Bone.
Yay.
Max Delton.
Yay.
Indigo David Liu. Marilyn Demisi. Mark Denon.
Yay.
Tess Dornfeld.
Aye.
Matthew Douglas May. Sandy Fazeli.
Yes.
Lauren Fleming,
Yay.
Maddie Henderson,
Yes.
Divine Islam, Leslie Jackson,
Yay.
Anna Johnson,
Aye.
Toya Lopez,
Aye.
Barbara Lundy, Nick Minderman,
Yes.
Suzanne Savinick Hansen,
Aye.
Jacqueline Cepeda,
Aye.
Aaron Niehoff.
Yes.
We have 15 yeses, so that motion passes.
Fantastic. All right. So with that,
Hi, everybody. Just listening in, Sean Gaszewski with RCC.
great. Welcome, Sean. Thanks for letting us know that you're on. Our first item on the agenda is the reading of our land acknowledgement statement. So as we meet here today, we are reminded that Minneapolis is situated on the homelands of the Dakota people, an area that is steeped in rich Indigenous history. It is home to Indigenous people from more than 30 different nations. As a city, we have a responsibility to care for the land on which we live and work and all its natural surroundings. This stewardship is an integral part of our involvement in this commission, and we honor it as we begin our meeting. I'm now going to open up this space to discuss ways in which we can support Indigenous people in our community. So if you know of any events or things that are happening that we should be aware of, feel free to raise your hand or just start speaking.
This is Sean. There's a joint bonding request from many of the different Native American agencies, including ones in Minneapolis like the American Indian Center and the OIC. That'll be coming up next year in the legislature.
Thank you, Sean. Anybody else? Okay. With that, our first presentation today will be from Joe Dammel from Fresh Energy, Trevor Drake from Great Plains Institute, and Audrey Partridge from the Center for Energy and Environment to discuss the G21 report and the future of fossil gas. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it on over to them.
Great. Thank you, Chair Niehoff. And Kim, I think it'll work if I just share my screen, my presentation.
That'd be terrific. Yeah.
Okay, great. I'll
Thank you.
work on that. Okay, can people see the presentation?
Yes.
Yes.
Great.
Yes,
All
we
right, I did it
can.
right.
Thank you.
Well, I just wanted to thank everyone for being here, and just wanted to note as well that I'll be doing the first half of the presentation, and then Trevor and Audrey will be doing the second half. And we didn't plan this ahead of time, but so there might be a little bit of overlap. But I think I'm going to be covering kind of why we're here, why we're talking about the future of gas, and Trevor and Audrey are going to talk about an initiative and a report that came out on pathways to get to that future that was conducted over the past couple of years. So I'll get right into it. Again, my name is Joe Dammel. I'm the Director of Gas Decarbonization at Fresh Energy. And a little bit about our organization. We've been around for almost 30 years and primarily work in the space of energy and climate solutions. And a lot of that work gets done at the Public Utilities Commission. But we have a really wide range of activities that, we work a lot at the legislature, So Anna Johnson is one of our key staff members who works at the legislature a lot. We have folks working in clean electricity. We have a communications department and then an energy news network, kind of journalism arm of it. And then we also have an energy access and equity group that interfaces with a wide range of, pretty much everyone at the organization. And we're about 30 staff large right now in 2021. And, we're working on a lot of really interesting things, in my opinion. So why are we here? Why are we talking about fossil gas? And I guess one thing that struck me, I was walking down my neighborhood a little while ago, and the thought occurred to me that every single house and every single building, certainly in Minneapolis and St. Paul, has a gas line, running under the street and up to the building. So it's something that we don't really think about too often. But there's some really, I think, compelling reasons why we need to start addressing this energy system in Minnesota. And I'm going to go through each of the four reasons that I have on the screen right now. So the first slide is about the climate impacts. And this might be a little overlap with what Trevor and Audrey will cover, because I think Audrey created this graphic. But it shows Minnesota's natural gas consumption starting in 2005 and all the way up through 2019, it looks like. It might be 2018. And you can see that in the commercial, industrial, and residential sectors, natural gas consumption has actually been increasing over time, and that's based on data that's compiled by the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency in their greenhouse gas accounting program. And I think it speaks to the problem that we're having in the state and across the country, really, where we're really starting to decarbonize the electric system, and that's great. And we have made significant progress and have a lot of work left to do in that space. But if we don't address the natural or fossil gas sector, we're still not going to meet our greenhouse gas reduction goals for the state or for the country. So I think this trend line brings together, three really important sectors of the natural gas world and its system, and I think just is a good illustration of the scope of the problem and the direction that we're headed as a state. So a second really important aspect is the health impact of burning fossil gas in our homes. We spend, roughly 90% of our lives indoors. And if you think about, your home or apartment, you might have a gas furnace or boiler. You might have a gas water heater, gas stove, fireplace, oven. And I think the understanding of the health impacts has been around for many decades. I recently came across the 1980 something report that was done by a utility executive on the health impacts of burning fossil gas in homes. And I think the evidence that the evidence of the health impacts has only grown stronger in recent years as we really get a handle on indoor air quality or start to. So the second reason why we care about fossil gas. The third reason is infrastructure. Like I mentioned before, if you think about all of the pipes in the ground, you might have seen some construction of new pipe being installed in your neighborhood or on your commute to work or school. And it's maybe it's not as your eyes deceiving you. There really has been an influx in distribution system expenditures or capital expenditures over the past 10 or 15 years. And this is a national look, and you can see that it's roughly $15 billion a year. And that's, even a little bit outdated at this point. We'll look to Minnesota. So this is from CenterPoint's most recent rate case, and they're describing the average annual capital expenditures in Minnesota over the past 20 years. And you can see for much of the early 2000s, it was about $65 million a year. And that's, to replace old or leaky pipes, replace meters, activities that the utility does to keep the system safe and reliable. And you can see just a very similar trend line in the just the sheer amount of investment. And the company is projecting in the out years, 2023, 2024, to be in the $300 million range for capital investment. And that puts upward pressure on rates. So you may have heard CenterPoint is in for another rate case that was just filed in November, and I think they've been filing every other year since about 2010. So you can see on the graph there that the capital investment is resulting in rate cases and rate increases. And I think the other thing to think about that is just the future impact of all this investment in our system. It's definitely important to have a safe and reliable gas system, but we also have to think about the future. And any investment that is still remaining in the future, if we transition away from the fossil gas system, or it gets a lot smaller, that will be reflected in rates in the future, and it'll be a stranded asset. So we really need to be smart about the investments we make today, because they're going to have impacts over the next 30, 40, 50 years. So we want to get a handle on that and really rethink our investment in fossil gas infrastructure. And then the fourth and final point is this price volatility. I think we've heard a lot about the impacts of the tropical storm or winter storm Uri last February, and the huge surge in price of natural gas that occurred because of that. And then we've also heard about the projections of much higher gas prices headed into the winter. And so I think it just underscores the volatility of this fuel that really has an impact on the energy burden that many households face. And I think it should cause us to rethink how much we're putting into relying upon such a volatile fuel. So really quickly on NGIA, and that's the Natural Gas Innovation Act that passed in earlier in 2021. And that really has two components in terms of what happens at the Public Utilities Commission. One is that they're going to open a future of gas proceeding, and that's docket 21-565. That's been opened, but it hasn't begun yet. We don't really know when that will start. My best guess will be sometime in the first half of 2022. And that's going to really be an investigatory docket looking at these big picture questions that I've brought up today about the future of fossil gas and how we can rethink gas utility business models. And so that'll be something where the public can be involved in. There's going to be comment periods and probably some hearings. And, we think that that's a really good venue to really look at these big picture questions. And then the other docket that NGIA opens up is the ability for utilities to file plans for certain innovative resources, including electrification, energy efficiency, renewable natural gas. And right now, Trevor, Audrey, and I and a group of stakeholders and utilities are working on figuring out the best way to measure, or the rules of the road, essentially to figure out how we can assess those plans. And that's happening both at the commission and at a public stakeholder meeting series that Trevor and the Great Plains Institute is leading. And so, those are the kind of the two big Public Utilities Commission dockets that that Fresh Energy is being involved in at the moment. Here's just an overview of our approach on the future of fossil gas and our gas decarbonization program. As I mentioned, there are openings at the Public Utilities Commission to take action to make policy change. We want to incorporate better planning for utilities so we understand why they're making these investments and to make sure that they're prudent. We want to, start looking at halting the expansion of our gas system, because like I said, the more we put into the ground, the harder and more expensive it's going to be to transition away from it in the future. We want to be really diligent about looking at solutions from utilities to make sure that they're really heavily scrutinized and in the best interest of the public. And then the last two are really important. We want to protect ratepayers from the transition, both in terms of the opportunity to have alternative resources and also just the bill impact. And then we also want to lead an equity-centered campaign, and I think that means bringing people and groups in communities into the Public Utilities Commission process, and really give a platform to really shape the policies that the Public Utilities Commission approves for utilities. So that's an overview of what we'd like to do over the next few years. And that is the end of my presentation. I'll turn it over to Trevor and Audrey, and I'll stop sharing my screen, I think.
I will try to start sharing my screen.
Success.
You're seeing it?
Yes, it
Yes.
is up.
Great.
Nice picture.
Thanks. Well, thanks for having us. I'm Trevor Drake again with the Great Plains Institute. I'm here with Audrey Partridge of the Center for Energy and Environment. We're here to present to you all on a stakeholder process we co-convened focused on decarbonizing Minnesota's natural gas end uses. We're going to stay pretty high level today, so if you would like additional detail, there's a huge report, and it is linked at the bottom of this slide. So here's our agenda for today. We're going to pretty quickly talk about why we convened the process and who was involved. Then we'll walk through modeling that looks at 3 different pathways to achieve decarbonization, and finally highlight some recommendations from the group. We're going to focus on the technical issues today and some of the recommendations, but we just want to mention this whole set of issues will have implications for workers, customers, and communities. And the report discusses a lot of that in more detail. So if you don't hear us talk a lot about equity, affordability, and workers, just know that those things were top of mind for the stakeholder group, and they'll all be a critical part of the conversation and the work going forward.
All right, so to start with why we decided this convening was needed and why we chose to focus on emissions from natural gas end uses as opposed to emissions from other sectors in our economy. You heard quite a bit about this already from Joe, so I'm going to go quickly through these slides because I think he really nailed it on his presentation. Next slide, please. So first, of course, is climate change. As you all know, the IPCC estimates that the planet today is about 1 degree Celsius, or actually a little more than 1 degree Celsius warmer than before the Industrial Revolution. At that level of warming, we're already seeing the devastating effects of climate change, and we know that those will increase over time as the planet continues to warm. In order to avoid the most catastrophic effects of climate change, we need to limit warming to no more than 1.5 degrees Celsius. And to do that, we need to reach net zero greenhouse gas emissions in the next 20 to 30 years. So to do that, we really need to address emissions across all areas of our economy, and we can't let any sector go unaddressed. Next slide, please. This is a graph from the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, just showing some of the things that Joe pointed out from a different perspective. These show greenhouse gas emissions by sector in Minnesota since 2005. And as you can see here, Minnesota is seeing increasing emissions from the building and industrial sectors. And that's being driven in large part by our increasing consumption of natural gas. I also think it's important to notice in this slide that of all the areas of our economy that the PCA is tracking here, the only areas with increasing emissions are again in that building and industrial sector. And that is again being driven by natural gas consumption. Next slide, please. So this graph starts with the graph that Joe showed you, showing consumption, and then turns it into emissions. So what you see here is emissions trends specifically from natural gas consumption in Minnesota's residential, commercial, and industrial sectors. Here you see emissions based on the real consumption data through 2019, and then a projection of emissions from there to 2050 if consumption continues to increase on the same trend it has in the last 15 years. So seeing this striking figure and our understanding of the complexities of dealing with natural gas in Minnesota, we decided to pull people together and to start focusing our attention on natural gas emissions in buildings and industry. And that is why we convened the stakeholder process that Trevor will discuss next.
Great. So just briefly about the process. As you can see here, the project benefited from a mix of different perspectives, including gas and electric utilities, clean energy advocates and implementers, labor advocates, state government agencies, and local governments. And the process was also guided by an advisory committee made up of the City of Minneapolis, Fresh Energy, Centerpoint Energy, and Excel Energy. And it was an in-depth process. So we brought these folks together for 15 stakeholder meetings over 18 months. And each of those meetings was nearly a full day in length. This allowed ample time for both expert presentations to build everybody's understanding of the issues, and then lots of facilitated discussion to understand different perspectives. We did drive to consensus for the recommendations, which are listed in the report, and we'll touch on a few of them at the end, and also a set of overall guiding principles. We're not going to cover those today, but they're listed in the report, and they do speak to things like affordability and equity. So early in the process, it became clear that this is a really complex issue. There's lots of interdependencies, there are emerging technologies, and there are just some unknowns. And this meant that, thinking towards 2050 and decarbonization, we would need a structured way to think about a very uncertain future in order to make sound recommendations. So the advisory committee pooled funding together to hire the consulting firm E3 to look at the impacts of 3 very different decarbonization scenarios. And each uses a unique mix of technologies and assumptions to reach 0 greenhouse gas emissions from natural gas end uses by 2050. All of the graphics that follow were developed by E3.
So before we jump into the modeling results, we want to establish a few definitions that will be useful for understanding those results. So first, when we say decarbonization, we mean the process of reducing and then eventually eliminating greenhouse gas emissions in line with the latest scientific recommendations. For this modeling, renewable natural gas is methane gas that is interchangeable with conventional fossil natural gas, but has been produced and processed to result in net 0 greenhouse gas emissions. We'll also talk about something called synthetic natural gas, which again is methane gas, but it has been synthetically produced using a carbon neutral process. And I want to be clear here that this is an emerging technology and it is not commercialized at scale at this point. Finally, when we refer to hydrogen, we are talking about hydrogen that has been produced with wind energy, resulting in no life cycle greenhouse gas emissions. Next slide.
All right, so I said before the group worked with E3 to design 3 decarbonization scenarios. Here they are. So the group ultimately picked 2 bookend scenarios that take 2 really different paths to decarbonization, and then a third scenario that's sort of a hybrid of the bookends. On the left, the high decarbonized gas scenario primarily heats buildings in 2050 with decarbonized forms of gas, and then fuels industry with green hydrogen. On the right, The high electrification scenario primarily heats buildings with electric heat pumps, using electric resistance for backup during the coldest hours. And industry is fueled by a mix of electricity and decarbonized gas, essentially electrifying where technically possible. And then in the middle, the electrification with gas backup scenario heats buildings primarily with electric heat pumps, but it uses decarbonized gaseous fuels in the coldest hours of the year. So that's why it's called with gas backup. And industry is the same as with the high electrification scenario. I'll just note, and you'll see this on the following slides, every scenario includes a mix of energy efficiency, electrification, and decarbonized gaseous fuel. So none of these are pure 100% electrification or 100% gaseous fuel scenarios.
So here you see that for each of our modeled scenarios, overall energy consumption actually decreases over time. And again, that illustrates the important role of energy efficiency in our modeling. As Trevor showed on the last slide, we assumed aggressive energy efficiency for all three scenarios, and that included a lot of efficiency for building shells for all buildings by 2050. The electrification with gas backup and the high electrification scenarios include additional efficiencies associated with fuel switching to electricity. So we found that energy efficiency reduces the costs as well as the technical challenges of decarbonization in all the scenarios we modeled. And importantly, the stakeholder group decided that increased efficiency has clear benefits regardless of what path Minnesota ultimately takes toward decarbonization of natural gas end uses.
So here you can see how gas and electricity consumption change from 2018 to 2050 for each of the scenarios. If you look first at the top row showing gas consumption, you'll see that all three scenarios resulted in a decline in gas consumption towards 2050. The bulk of this decline is in residential and commercial buildings, while industry continues to use gaseous fuels, especially for high heat processes in all three scenarios. You'll then see on the bottom row that electricity consumption increases in all the scenarios. The increase is primarily driven by industrial electrification because increases in building electricity consumption are largely offset by energy efficiency. And I'll just note that this shows total consumption, not system peak, which is something that we'll cover in another slide. So then this is showing how much and what types of decarbonized gas we'd be using in 2050. By then, fossil gas, which you see on the left in the reference case, would be completely replaced by electricity, efficiency, and decarbonized gaseous fuels. Those fuels are renewable natural gas in dark green, synthetic methane in light green, and hydrogen in blue. All scenarios also include a small amount of hydrogen blended into the gas system, which is not shown here. And just looking at the high decarbonized gas bar for a moment, I'll mention that the stakeholder group chose to include dedicated hydrogen for industry in only that scenario. So that's why hydrogen is showing up so prominently in that one. And that entire blue box represents the thermal needs of industry that would have been served by natural gas.
So as promised, here we have the electric system peak demand shown for each of our scenarios. As you can see in the high decarbonized gas scenario, electric peak demand goes up very slightly in winter, just about matching our current summer peak, and then it remains flat. That slight increase in winter is due to very modest electric heat pump adoption over current levels. In the high electrification and the electrification with gas backup scenarios, we see winter peak surpass summer peak. And this is due to more aggressive electric heat pump adoption in those scenarios. Both of the electrification scenarios assume all electric heat for new construction. For existing homes, however, the high electrification scenario includes electric resistance as the backup heat. So that actually further increases the peak. While the electrification with gas backup, of course, has a gas fuel backup heating source for existing homes, and that helps mitigate some of the winter peak compared to the high electrification scenario. Next slide, please. Here you can see the total incremental electric system costs in 2050 for each scenario, shown relative to our reference case. Increased electric loads, of course, drive up electric system cost, and that's primarily to meet that additional winter peak capacity that we just looked at. So as you can see, our modeling shows that pairing electric heat pumps with gas backup heating sources can significantly reduce electric system costs compared to the high electrification scenario by mitigating that increase in peak load.
So here we pull back to the big picture cost implications of our 3 scenarios. These graphs show how much more money we'd be spending in the year 2050 compared to the reference case. Given the high uncertainty around future costs of gaseous fuels, we included a high and low sensitivity for gas costs. So in each pair of bars under each scenario, you've got high gas costs on the left and low gas costs on the right. And I'll just remind folks, when I say gas, I mean the decarbonized forms of gaseous fuels. So looking first at the high gas cost bars, the electrification with gas backup scenario is the most affordable, while the high decarbonized gas scenario is the most expensive. And then looking at lower gas costs, the electrification with gas backup and the high decarbonized gas scenarios would tie for most affordable, while the high electrification scenario would be most expensive.
So now for the most important outcome of the process, the recommendations of the stakeholder group. So the group developed 25 different consensus recommendations categorized by cross-cutting, meaning that the recommendation was pertinent across all sectors and many actors, large commercial and industrial customer recommendations, workforce recommendations, residential and small business recommendations, and finally, utility and regulatory recommendations. Today, given time, we won't talk in detail about each of the recommendations, but we'll run through a few that we think will be most relevant to this group.
All right, so here we have the cross-cutting recommendations. These were broad recommendations that the group felt like could be relevant and pertinent across many or all sectors of the economy. So first, the group recommends broad attention to equity as well as education and awareness of addressing gas use for decarbonization. And then third here, the group recommends greater exploration of how district energy systems might play a role in this. So this technology could be a helpful tool in residential applications as well as commercial and industrial. We did have some high-level modeling that looked at district systems, but out of time, we didn't include it here today.
And here are the group's recommendations, excuse me, for the residential and small business sectors. The group found that we already have some known tools and technologies that can help us to decarbonize this sector, and namely heat pumps and efficiency. So these recommendations focus a lot on increased building shell efficiency specifically and heat pump deployment. Additionally, the group included recommendations around reducing barriers to adopting decarbonizing technologies, particularly for renters, and addressing health and safety issues, as well as reducing energy burden, especially for customers who face high energy burdens today.
And there are additional recommendations, but we felt like those might be the most important to highlight, and we'd be happy to take any questions or discussion. So I think I will turn it back over to Chair Niehoff.
Thank you, Trevor. I guess a question that I have is like, what could SEAC do to help with pushing for those recommendations as far as like the city of Minneapolis goes?
I was just looking, Audrey, if you want to take that.
Sorry, I was responding to a question in the chat. I apologize.
Oh, let me take it then. Or at least start with, and sure. You all can add. So for things the city can do, I mean, there are some clear near-term actions, and one of those is heat pumps in the residential sector. So Audrey touched on that. I think also paying attention to equity and thinking about that is pretty important. And Luke is here and has been pretty involved in the process and may have kind of additional ideas of things that the city is working on. I don't know, Audrey, if you would, or Joe, if you'd add to that before we turn it to Luke.
Yeah, I would just say the city is already doing quite a lot to help support these recommendations. Luke was a member of the advisory committee and really one of the sort of helped birth this idea with us. You know, he was a thought leader on this. I think the Clean Energy Partnership, the Sustainability Office. I mean, the city of Minneapolis is really, I think, working to help advance a lot of these. And so I guess one thing I'd say is keep up the good work. Stacy is a great advocate at the PUC. So that would be my message.
Yeah, thanks, Audrey and Trevor. I'll just add, yeah, the G21 report, as we call it for short, that whole process has really informed a lot of our approach now to the Clean Energy Partnership work that I work on, and really everybody in our sustainability office works on to some extent. It's helped, especially the modeling has been very helpful in thinking through what future path the city is interested in. In particular, the policymakers that were on the Clean Energy Partnership Board from the city have a strong preference that the city kind of pursue programs that go down one of two paths. That would be either the high electrification path or the electrification with gas backup path, and not the decarbonized gas path, considering the uncertainty in price and availability of those gaseous alternatives. So coming to that conclusion was the result of seeing what came out of the G21 process. And now we're using that preference towards some significant amount of electrification, whether it's near total or a majority is still up for question, but we're using that to drive then what are the next energy related activities we want to accomplish in the Clean Energy Partnership over the next 2 years, because we're currently working on a new work plan for that. Additionally, it's also really informed a lot of the work we just do for individual energy programs in our office, and we've been thinking a lot more about what are some electrification measures we can dip our toe into. For instance, could we find the financial resources to incentivize replacing gas water heaters with electric heat pump water heaters? Even transitioning gas stoves to electric stoves. The technology is available for those now, and it's not as difficult of a problem to solve as how do you electrify home heating. So we're thinking about ways that we can begin incentive programs, promotional educational programs for that type of kind of near-term electrification.
Thank you. There is a question that's currently in the chat, but Leslie has had her hand up. So before we go to the chat, I want to touch on Leslie first.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you guys for coming for the presentation. I have a couple questions. First, have you considered what to do with the waste when you do the transformation from the gas system to the electrification? Because I know you cannot change gas stoves to electric, but electric to gas. And if we don't have a plan for the stoves or whatever systems that the gas use, I don't know the pipes and all that stuff, but I don't want to create another graveyard like these cars we have. Also, with the construction and the changing of the systems, have you considered the embodied carbon that it will be creating from the transformation? And thank you for your time.
I'll maybe say on the appliances piece, we didn't talk about appliance recycling and what that would look like and sort of the transition. So that's something we can certainly look into. I mean, one consideration would be replacing appliances sort of at end of life, but there's a question about whether that would be fast enough on the trajectory that folks would like to see. So some of those appliances may be being phased out because they need to be replaced anyway, and that would be a good time to switch them over. I know there are some appliance recycling programs. I think the county offers those. And then I didn't actually catch your last question, something about embodied carbon, but I don't know if
with the transformation of from gas to electric, it's going to create a increase in embodied carbon. You know, when you do things besides the transportation within. So I'm just wondering, has that been considered? So embodied carbon.
Sure. I can take this one, Trevor. I think we did not consider embedded emissions. So what Leslie is talking about, for those who maybe haven't heard of this, it's, you know, what kinds of emissions are created in making something like an electric air source heat pump or another electric piece of equipment, or maybe other types of technologies that we looked at, like say insulation. So we didn't look at embedded emissions. I think there may be a conversation about that in the greenhouse gas emission or greenhouse gas accounting docket for the Natural Gas Innovation Act, but I don't expect that we will incorporate embedded emissions there. I am not an expert on embedded emissions, but I think that we will likely stop at a similar boundary that we stopped at with the G21 report, and that is we will look at the fuel cycle, but not the embedded one-time emissions associated with equipment or infrastructure.
Thank you. But I kind of think because if it's such a large change in the way the city is and across the state, even the United States, it's something that needs to be considered when we're talking about decarboning and cutting our emissions, because that's something that people seem to forget to include, and it does have impact. So I'm just wondering, even though you're saying that, it might be something that maybe not you, Audrey, but Trevor or Luke might think about when moving forward into different sectors of the community or different meetings, and this topic might come up. Thank you.
Yeah, and I can weigh in here as well. You know, I think it's a really good example of something that we can also have a discussion about, you know, before the commission and the public comment process. I think, you know, it's good to welcome, you know, a lot of different viewpoints and you know, surface issues that might not be part of kind of a stakeholder process or what have you. So yeah, I think, you know, there's what Audrey was talking about with the greenhouse gas in accounting framework. There's a comment period that will be open. That's open now, and it closes February, mid to late February. I can't remember the exact date, but I'll put a link in the chat. And you know, I think the Public Utilities Commission really values hearing a lot of different perspectives. And if you see something that you know, you want the commission to look at, you know, you can contact Fresh Energy, but you can also, you know, participate in that commission public comment process.
I'll maybe just add one more thing on these emissions for sort of manufacturing, the appliances and materials and pipes and all of that. I think it's a fair point, and we've got some work looking at industrial sector decarbonization. So that's another way to approach it. I mean, all of these solutions would require investments in infrastructure, and that's going to, you know, some of that manufacturing will cause emissions. So we've been looking at, you know, how can industry continue to manufacture the products that we need, but do it with increasingly lower emissions.
Thank you. We have another hand that's raised. Sandy.
Thank you. This might be a bit of an offshoot from Leslie's question. I'm sorry if it's outside of the scope, but the federal infrastructure bill and, you know, the Department of Energy at the federal level, they've been pushing for sort of greater electrification, a new heat pump program. And it feels like it might be out of sync with Biden's goal of kind of bringing more manufacturing to the US. And so I was curious about whether there was any analysis done on how much of the investments that you're recommending are actually American products versus, ones that might be made in other countries with national security issues. Just something that's been on my mind.
Yeah, we did not look at that for this process or for the modeling that we conducted, but it is a great question. And I know that there are questions not only around sourcing for equipment, but also supply chain constraints as well. So I think that's certainly an area for people to dig into next.
Thanks, Audrey.
Anna, as the last question before we need to move on to our next presentation.
Thanks, Erin. And thanks to our presenters for being here. I really appreciate it. I'm just thinking about because we're racing right now against the clock to get down to zero emissions, and our buildings are, they're built to last a long time, and we have really strong infrastructure. Leslie talked about the pipes that are built into our buildings. So I'm just wondering, this is a little more conceptual, esoteric, but what should it feel like? What is it gonna look like? How many buildings per year do we need to be making super efficient and switching off of natural gas in Minneapolis and in the state in order to meet our decarbonization goals? How fast do we need to be going, and how can, if you have any thoughts about how to accelerate that momentum?
Yeah, I can take a first stab at that. I think, what Trevor has on the screen, efficiency should always be something that we prioritize and put as much money toward as we can. And I think, especially that can be a tool for under-resourced communities and individuals to really decrease the energy burden. So I think that's just a no regrets opportunity is to go all in on efficiency. I think in terms of electrification, electrifying buildings, it has to happen really rapidly. And I think, it also has to happen strategically from my perspective. We can't just go in and do kind of a random or sporadic electrification of a neighborhood, for example. I think you can start, maybe with making the cost of connecting to either natural gas or electricity in new developments more evenly realized by developers. So taking away some of the incentives that are built in to build out the natural gas system. Not building gas in the first place, infrastructure in the first place is, a really low-hanging fruit that I think we should look at. And then I think you really have to be thoughtful about looking at electric infrastructure and gas infrastructure. So if you have a neighborhood that is due for a gas replacement, look at, have the ability to overlay the electric system. And if they have room on that system of feeders and that part of the distribution system, maybe think about targeting that neighborhood for electrification, because then you're facing an end of life for the gas infrastructure that's in place, and you have an opportunity to build out, increase the electric demand in that specific neighborhood. So I think it has to happen pretty strategically and targeted, but it also has to happen rapidly. So I think the future of Gas Docket will be a place to kind of put those pieces into place where we can have visibility on the gas system and also the electric system and also communities to make sure that we do it rapidly, but also in the public interest and equitably.
I'll maybe just add two quick things if we have time, Chair Niehoff. And I pulled this up for this reason, and Joe touched on some of this. One is that bullet, all scenarios assume a 29% reduction in space heating demand. That is huge. there was a big discussion with our group. Some folks said, no way, we're never going to get there. Other folks said, it's not enough, we need to go further. It's a big lift, but we have more to do. So the efficiency piece is huge. The other thing I wanted to point out is the two scenarios on the right, the electrification with gas backup and high electrification. You'll notice they both primarily use electric heat pumps. And then it's just a question of how are you doing that backup heating? So you don't necessarily need to figure out, are we shutting off gas for buildings? You really need to deploy heat pumps at efficiency, and you can sort of punt on that question. And folks may have seen that there was an announcement today that New York City is likely going to implement a gas ban. My colleagues and I have had a long email chain going today talking about the implications of that and thinking through this. But even there, you need to deploy electric alternatives, and the best alternative right now is heat pumps and efficiency.
I know you said there was one last question, but I have one quick one. I don't see any check-in points. You're just going straight to 2050. Do you guys are going to incorporate some place in, to do a check-in to see exactly how your plan is being successful?
Audrey, do you want to take that
Yeah.
one?
So there's a lot of slides. Actually, there's a lot of modeling that we didn't show you today that shows more of a progression along the way to 2050. We just pulled a handful in the interest of time and not to bore you guys too much with all of the details. But yeah, there's definitely more to this, and it doesn't just jump to 2050.
Great. Well, thank you, everyone, for the questions. And there is another question that Tess just asked in the chat. So if any of you are able to stay on and willing to respond to some of the things in the chat, that would be awesome. Recognizing that we won't be able to have a further discussion on that right at this time. And now we're going to move on to a presentation on the Metropolitan Council's I forget what the name of it is called. 2 seconds. Greenhouse gas scenario planning tool. So I'm going to hand it on over.
Hello, everyone. Again, my name is Mauricio Leon, and I work as a researcher for the Metropolitan Council. I am really excited to talk to you today about this greenhouse gas scenario planning tool that we have been developing for local governments in the metro region. So we're talking about over 180 local governments that are in the 7-county metro region, and that of course includes Minneapolis as one of them. And I want to start this by showing you a video that we made to really explain this work in an accessible way. So I'll be sharing my screen and a video that we have for you. So just 1 second here. Excuse me, I had to share it with audio, so I didn't do that. 1 second.
Perfect, we can see it and hear it.
Human activities have warmed the atmosphere, ocean, and land, which has led to extreme heat waves, heavy precipitation, droughts, and other storms. Every inhabited region of the globe is under the threat of climate change. Despite our cold winters, Minnesota's average temperatures have warmed at an alarming rate in the last century, and the risk of flooding has increased substantially. These changes pose a serious threat to our region's natural resources, economy, and our residents.
Cities have a big role to play in reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and because a lot of where emissions happen is in cities, through the energy used in buildings, through the transportation sector, and cities have a lot of ability to impact the ways in which we use energy for those two major sectors.
The Met Council provides a lot of tools and resources to our local governments and technical assistance around the area of climate change. I'm super excited about this new tool that the Met Council is rolling out, which is our greenhouse gas scenario planning tool for our local government partners. It's critically important for our local governments to know if their initiatives around climate are working or not. So this scenario planning tool will help them decide which action they should take to have the most impact in their region.
Our scenario planning tool will provide flexible and tailored strategies for Minnesotan cities to reduce emissions. Our tool is built on collaboration with leading researchers in the greenhouse gas emissions mitigation field and is compatible with all types of cities.
I am Anu Ramaswamy, a professor at Princeton University. I'm the lead faculty director of the Sustainable Healthy Cities Network, which brings together researchers from multiple institutions to work together on sustainable urban development. My team has developed a greenhouse gas scenario planning tool for the Twin Cities metropolitan region in Minnesota, which helps different communities of different types chart pathways towards net zero emissions, bringing together strategies across multiple sectors. These sectors include compact land use, mobility, buildings, waste, and green infrastructure and trees.
The scenario planning tool will be offered on an easy-to-use and easy-to-understand online platform. Cities can investigate different mitigation scenarios and strategies and use the tool to identify solutions tailored to their communities. Testing various planning scenarios such as green infrastructure, building energy use, and transportation will help cities better understand and forecast their greenhouse gas emissions in the coming decades.
Cities should use the greenhouse gas scenario planning tool to determine priorities in climate action planning. We live in very uncertain times. Technology is changing rapidly, and the pandemic showed us that our driving and energy use will change for reasons that we cannot control. Therefore, we are taking an exploratory scenario planning approach, where we acknowledge that there is not one, but many scenarios.
The first bucket of strategies is compact land use development. Compact land use development can reduce greenhouse gas emissions in two ways. First, it can help reduce the need for traveling long distances and encourage the use of multimodal transportation. And second, compact development promotes more multifamily buildings, which are very helpful in saving emissions per person. The second bucket of strategies is energy efficient technologies. The greenhouse gas scenario planning tool includes a number of new and emerging technologies. For example, electric cars, which can be an excellent low-carbon, energy-efficient alternatives to conventional internal combustion engines. The third bucket of strategies is conservation and sustainable behaviors. There are a number of policy instruments that are modeled in the greenhouse gas scenario planning tool, which encourage people to use energy more efficiently and to engage in sustainable practices. In addition, we also model behavioral nudging that can encourage people by leveraging their social networks or through other forms of messaging to engage in sustainable behaviors. For example, road pricing as a policy can encourage people to drive less or to have more vehicle occupants in the same vehicle, which can be incredibly powerful in reducing energy use. Renewable energy and fuel switching is the fourth lever in the path towards zero carbon emissions. Indeed, zero carbon electricity is a critical pathway to get to zero carbon emissions overall. And cities can play a big role by promoting the adoption of local solar panels that can generate renewable energy locally within communities to complement the utilities getting to net zero. The action by utilities, larger utilities, to develop net zero electricity is extremely critical and complements the action of cities and communities. So the fifth lever of change is carbon sequestration, which can be done through trees and increasing reforestation and having compact development so that urban land is not overtaking existing forests or agricultural land. By twinning reforestation and preventing urban expansion into forests and agricultural land, cities can blend together nature-based solutions in their path to net zero.
The creation of a new scenario planning tool could be really valuable for us in that we're always trying literally month to month to figure out where's the best use of our time in focusing in on reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And scenarios can help us decide whether to focus more on particular transportation initiatives or building energy initiatives or other things that we know we have to do. But it can really help us decide which ones we need to do first, which actions can have the most impact, and how to stage those over time.
A city might want to change one or a few of the assumptions that we have built in the tool. So then we can work together to adjust the assumptions and improve on our initial version.
All of these things work together to create synergistic multiplicative benefits that are really helpful for communities to drive towards zero carbon emissions.
If we don't start with good quality information, we don't necessarily know where we're going, and we don't necessarily have the most effective means of figuring out how to get there.
As Minnesotans, we already experience the extremes of climate change, and more changes are inevitable. The Metropolitan Council is committed to partnering with our region's cities and communities to face these challenges with data, research, and practical tools. Utilizing the Council Scenario Planning tool is one opportunity for us to act together for a better future.
If we're going to have an impact on climate change, that means every one of us doing what we can in our own household, in our own neighborhood, in our own city, and our own region, our own state, our own nation. And collectively, that will have an impact. And so the Met Council is a piece of this jigsaw puzzle that working collaboratively with our partners, we can have an impact.
So coming soon, we'll be releasing this greenhouse gas scenario planning tool. Another thing I wanted to show you to this group is this came like a few months ago in the New York Times. It was a really interesting news article, interactive news article. Actually, it came back in 2019, so that was like more than 2 years ago. But as you can see, it really, what I want to highlight here is it really captures this idea of a wedge diagram, and it explains it very well how, if we look at the baseline emissions of the United States here, and then what is the projection, we can see, that basically if we continue in a current trend, we're going to have more emissions. And then this lovely news article shows here what is the pledge of the 2025, the U.S. Paris Pledge for 2025. It shows a goal here, and it shows basically the impact of different policies that have been implemented in some other countries. So here is the British Columbia carbon tax. Here's what New York clean electricity goal would look like if the whole country was to adopt that. Norway's electric vehicle push, China's industrial efficiency targets. So really good illustration. It really gets at the core of what this is about. I think the previous presentation also kind of got to a bit of that type of exercise at the state level and thinking about, natural gas and specific. So I'm going to share now my slide deck. So the Metropolitan Council, of course, is a large organization, and we run the buses and the flushes. So we run Metro Transit, of course, that's a big part of our operations, and we run the wastewater, regional wastewater treatment. But we also have a community development division that does work with local governments, as well as Metropolitan Transportation Services, which does a lot of the transportation planning for a region. So some actions that the Metropolitan Council is taking is it's taking both actions to reduce and prepare for climate change. We're currently developing our first climate action plan. And given that our operations are so large, this first climate action plan will be oriented towards our operations. Also, as part of our role, we provide technical assistance to local governments on climate change. So this came from our last regional plan. It was identified as a goal of the council, and here we are actually implementing this goal of working with local governments to provide assistance on climate change. So for today, I want to talk about what is this greenhouse gas scenario planning tool? Why will someone develop a greenhouse gas scenario planning tool? And how can cities in the metro region and the city of Minneapolis benefit from this? So what is the greenhouse gas scenario planning tool? It's basically a tool, it's a web application, but behind a web application, there's a lot of calculations that happen. It takes data from many multiple data sets, including data from energy utilities, data from the transportation demand model, data from our wastewater treatment unit. And really what it does is just calculate how can we reach net zero emissions by 2040. So it starts with a business as usual projection. So similar to what I was showing you from the New York Times article, it starts by saying, what will our emissions be if we just continue to do the same things we're doing? So if we don't adopt any policy, and then it calculates the impact of different mitigation strategies. And basically, when we talk about greenhouse gas emissions at the community scale, we are thinking about, a handful of sectors that include building, energy, transportation, waste, and land use change. So building energy, of course, because it's using electricity, natural gas, transportation, because we're using gasoline, diesel, and waste because we're looking at the emissions that come from the decomposition of organic materials that's going to release greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. Then the category of land use change has to do with every time we expand, we change land uses, going from, let's say, forest to agriculture. That's going to have an impact on greenhouse gas emissions as well. Of course, it's best to keep or grow the forested land. And when we think about strategies for reducing carbon emissions, strategies that are many times at the hands of local governments, but sometimes at the hands of other forms of government, like the state or the federal government. Here is a list. We can talk about like regulations. We can talk about having incentives for certain behaviors. We can talk about pricing, awareness campaigns. Here's basically a list of like all the things that a city can do to influence greenhouse gas emissions on a policy level, at least. So as the video mentions, this tool calculates the greenhouse gas impact of different mitigation strategies on these 5 categories. So we're looking at compact land use and planning, is this idea that by building more compact, we can reduce emissions, and that occurs because by building more compacts, we use less energy per person. Also, it reduces the frequency and distance of vehicle trips. You know, here in Minnesota, we have all the suburbs and exurbs. Of course, that comes with a lot more driving. Energy efficient technology. So again, a lot of what the previous presenters were talking about, and that in the transportation sector could be moving to electric vehicles. In the building sector could be looking at building retrofits, looking at replacing natural gas to electric heaters, that sort of thing. Conservation and sustainable behavior, that's one of my favorites because it really is assuming that, if we change our behavior like households and businesses, we can also see a reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. Clean energy supply, it's huge. And, some of the preliminary results from this work show that, of course, one of the biggest wedges that we will see to accomplish to achieve our decarbonization goals is at the clean energy level. So includes, of course, the utility, and includes, of course, what the city can do in addition to the utility to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And lastly, we have sequestering carbon. So in Minneapolis, of course, that's going to be more preserving the forested land, increasing like the urban forestry canopy. There's not a lot of room to increase forested land, but to keep that as a strategy, because the more we can keep those trees, the better. And so the tool basically works on 3 interdependent modules. We calculate the emissions for these 3 sectors: building, energy, transportation, and green infrastructure, but acknowledging that these 3 sectors really like interact with each other. So for example, how is electric vehicles gonna impact the building energy demand? So thinking about those interdependencies is really important for this exercise of scenario planning. Here are the 5 strategies again. Within these 5 strategies, there's more specific actions. So for example, when we talk about land use, we talk about the 5 Ds. I don't know if you're familiar with this idea of the 5 Ds. It has to do with, it stands for something like density, diversity of use, distance. Is this idea that, changing planning to include more density and other things really is going to pay off in greenhouse gas emissions, but also increasing public transit, compact buildings, affordable floor area. So just want to leave this here, this 1 second, so that you all get the chance to read some of the strategies. During our initial stakeholder engagement for this work, we got a lot of interest in telework because we started this process right when the pandemic started. So folks were really interested in understanding the impact of telework as a strategy. And so we included that in the tool. Here's renewable natural gas. And I have to clarify, for this work, we work in collaboration with folks from academia. So we were able to bring experts on this field from the University of Minnesota, and then moved to the University of Princeton. It was Professor Anu Ramaswamy, who you saw in that video. And from University of Texas at Austin, we have Kara Kokelman, who's an expert on transportation. And she's done a lot of like modeling of autonomous vehicles. There's a big uncertainty. I know that sounds futuristic, but if we are serious about planning for emissions, we have to really explore all the different ways that things can turn out. And that's why we use exploratory scenario planning. For example, autonomous vehicles, it could be anywhere from 0 to 100 in the next 20 years. We really don't know. It might be that it hits a threshold and then, everyone is now using an autonomous vehicle. We just don't know. And so that's why we need to explore multiple scenarios. We also assume that population is going to change in a certain way, but we don't know the future. So we cannot put all our eggs in one basket. We really have to be more flexible in how we prepare for climate change and how we think about greenhouse gas emissions. If anyone is interested on like the science of this, I think this table is a little overwhelming, and so I'm not going to keep it here for too long. But basically, it shows how each of these strategies impact emissions in each of these categories. I'm just going to leave here 1 second. It really is not as necessary for this conversation. So why develop a greenhouse gas scenario planning tool? Some advantages of building a greenhouse gas scenario planning tool is leveraging science to reduce emissions. So this is really important because there are many solutions out there about how to, reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but really that has to be filtered through science. And it has to be unbiased science, and it has to be open science. So one problem that I have with some of the work that's done elsewhere is that, they hire like this consultant, they produce these results, but the model itself is proprietary. So it is really hard to kind of go beyond a certain level of scrutiny. I think by this work happening at the government and with academia, then, if anyone is interested in just really going deep into how this works, it's all out there. The code is out there. Like they can go to GitHub and just kind of go through the code if they want. So that's one big advantage. And then another one is that it optimizes cost and benefits. So again, what are the values of the city? And based on that, you decide what your greenhouse gas strategy is. So maybe the city of Minneapolis, I know, values equity. So maybe that's one of the values that by which you want to select the strategies for greenhouse gas emissions. So there's not just one way to achieve net zero emissions. There are multiple ways. Some are more expensive than others, but it also depends on what are your values, right? So maybe you want to find what is the most cost-effective solution, or maybe you don't think that you can pull the resources to accomplish that. So you really want to have like all the options at your disposal.
Just as a quick heads up, I would say maybe about 5 minutes max for the rest of the presentation, just so that you have some time for questions at the end.
Yeah, I think I'm almost there.
Fantastic.
Yeah, so we talk about best data sets and best methodologies, government and academia partnership. Yeah. And I think one of the things that we really want to see here is to convene a regional conversation. So we all know that for Minneapolis to accomplish its goal is one thing, right? But it's not that Minneapolis it's only by itself. There's so many like neighbor communities that we have to work with, and there's these conversations with the state that need to happen and with the private sector. So by having this tool, we can convene a more regional conversation that could yield like good results in terms of advocating for certain like strategies at other levels of government. So I know Minneapolis has done a lot of work on greenhouse gas accounting. I know Luke, he always shows this like really good charts of the progress and what are the strategies, and I love that. I think that Minneapolis is of course ahead of the game compared to, it also has of course more resources for this work compared to other communities. I think you have to consider this tool is available to communities that have not had a conversation yet about greenhouse gas emissions. So it really saves them the effort of having to, just compile the data and all of that, which tends to be really really costly. So this is also a way that Minneapolis could evaluate other pathways to decarbonization. I think big assumptions are made about the utility, but what if the utility does not meet its goals? Like we basically have like a a lot of trust in something going a particular way, but we really need to like find alternative scenarios. It's a beautiful city. Well, just a little bit about Minneapolis goal, 80% by 2050. So this is something to keep in mind when starting using this tool. So when is this still gonna be available? Again, coming soon. We expect to have it ready by Earth Day. We just had our last stakeholder engagement where people share their perspectives on this work. And there's a webinar that I can facilitate to you because it's on YouTube, where the professors who were working on the engine of this tool really break down all the science. Well, not all the science. They break down more of the methodology that they did. And the Metropolitan Council is building a web application that makes it easy to use this tool. Again, a city can just use the web application and select a few strategies and go with that. If they want to go further and they want to actually replicate the tool in a different with a different set of assumptions, that is also possible. So we really embrace the concept of open science, meaning all of the work should be available to anyone. If City of Minneapolis wants to hire a data scientist to really replicate some of this work and extend it, or whatever they want to do with it, that's also a possibility. And of course, we welcome your feedback. And if I have a minute here, I want to show you what our web application is looking like. And this is not a final product, but this kind of like a demonstration with dummy data of what the web application could look like. We're actually working on embedding all the methodologies into the web application. But basically, a city will go here and just click on the on this tab and find their city here. Of course, there's no real data right now. And then they could start looking at a diagram similar to this one that we just saw for the New York Times, where they can see their different wedges, and here are the different strategies that they can be using. Okay, I think that's my time, but I would love to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you. It looks like we already have one from Leslie. So Leslie, what's your question?
Not surprised. Anyway, I have a question. This is a great presentation. And since you got this tool for people to use, what are the strategies that Metro Council is using for transportation? And have you put that in the plan itself? And what are you going to do about the buses, since you're talking about decarbonization and electrification? Are the city buses planning to be electrified? And if so, what are you going to do with those ones that are operated by gas? And what's your role as far as Metro Council cutting down emissions in every avenue that you have your foot into? Okay.
I'd love to give you a good answer on that, but what I have to say is that we're working on a climate action plan that's going to lay out our strategy, I do see a lot of action. So, for example, they pilot electric vehicles for their buses, and I don't work on the metro transit. That's a whole like different universe. So I'm gonna limit what I say here, but I think that this first climate action plan is going to be an effort to incorporate this science as well into our operations, and later start having the conversation about our regional climate action plan, which is actually outward facing, so of the whole region. But at this first stage is of our operations, and we're really kind of now having that debate about what is the best way of electrifying buses and increasing service in some places. And for the wastewater unit, there's a lot of discussion there, because the wastewater treatment, even though in the big scheme of things is not a huge source of emissions, it's still an important source of emissions. And so there's all these ways in which it can be optimized to reduce emissions. That, of course, comes with all sorts of considerations, such as not increasing the cost to consumers, right? So there's all this balance, these things that we need to trade off and balance.
I'm not trying to be rude, but to me, you have a plan, but you haven't used the sources within your within Metro Council to see if the plan works. So I have this plan, and I'm going to use these elements to see that if it works for other cities. So with the transportation, even though you're not in the buses, but you have this plan, and why haven't you? I'm just devil's advocate. Use the transportation and the water stuff to put into your plan that you have, that you're promoting here and showing us that it actually works.
Yeah,
I have another question.
I think we're having that conversation.
Sorry, Sean, just a minute.
Okay.
Yep.
We're absolutely having that conversation, and I don't want to talk on behalf of Metro Transit. That's but I do think that there's some important conversations happening on how to actually get this vision into reality.
And I'll just like add a little bit too, that we have been working with within the city and our intergovernmental relations team and with the Met Council on a number of electric vehicle grants, in which we're specifically pushing to have 40-foot electric buses purchased with any stimulus money in this transportation budget as well. So the Met Council has been working with us to help try to figure out how we bring electric buses more quickly in some of the urban areas where there is higher concentrations of pollution. So it's, and as Mauricio said, it's a really big organization, but they have been in talks with us.
Thanks, Kim.
Aaron, is it okay?
I think
Chris, Sean here?
I think there's Tess had one, and then Sean,
Okay.
and then Anna.
Okay, yeah.
So Tess first.
Yeah, I have two questions, and I'll try to be brief on net zero and the compact land use. First, it looked like all of the sequestration measures that were given were around green space and trees. So I wonder if that is why you went with the 2040 net zero goal as opposed to a zero emissions goal, is just those types of sequestration. And then second, on the compact land use, obviously this is focused on emissions, but I do wonder about the issues that go along with, especially the sorts of development that were shown in the video, and the things that tend to go along with that in terms of affordability. I noticed that it did say affordable floor space is one of the subsets of that. But in terms of the way that Met Council envisions this tool being used by cities, is it sort of going to be they can take it on their own and then maybe are not taking those other aspects into consideration? Or is it going to be something where you're working with them and making sure those kinds of other concerns are as they're making their choices about which strategies to pursue. Thanks.
Yeah, those are really good questions. The first part was about net zero emissions. I have to be honest with you, it's really hard to it's gonna be really hard to get to even net zero emissions. And so yeah, I think that it's gonna be a very significant effort. So I think that we need to balance, that when we put, something like this, zero emissions, yeah. And the second part was about land use, and so you're saying, so basically the tool looks at compact land use. So really thinking about how we can use space more efficiently to are you suggesting that is not something that you see as affordable?
Well, I'm asking if, in terms of emissions, a compact land use might be a great strategy, but then if cities move ahead with that without taking into consideration anything about affordability or the effects on, the surrounding neighborhood, or depending on, the circumstances of that development, it might be reducing their emissions, but it also might have adverse effects outside of emissions that they're not taking into account. And so I wonder if there's any sort of, caveats or ways that cities will, not just run with these, pursuing emission reductions without taking into account those kinds of factors about affordability or equity concerns.
Those are really good questions. I think that affordability is such an important topic here. I'm sorry, I'm not. Yeah, I think one argument that I have here is that by increasing the supply of housing units, that's a way to tackle affordability, because basically what we're going through is a shortage of housing units. So people want to buy houses, but because the supply is so low, then the houses that are for sale can afford to really increase their prices. So by increasing the number of housing units, which is something that goes with density, that's one way to make affordable housing occur naturally. Of course, that is not automatic, as we see a lot of also vertical development that is very luxurious, and so that might be really expensive too. So I think, yeah, this is a really good conversation to have.
Tess, I don't know if this helps at all, but I'm wondering, is your question about if there are certain caveats that are displayed in the tool regarding, other considerations outside of some of those mathematical and scientific things that can be tracked?
Sure.
Yeah.
That might be one way.
So
Or
supplementary, yeah. Okay, I got it now.
Yeah,
So yes, including supplementary information about, compact development and what are the potential unintended effects that might have. Okay, sorry, it just took me a second to answer. It's a really good question, though.
Sean, and then Anna, and then we will need to wrap up.
Yep.
Hello, Sean Guszewski with the Resilient Communities Coalition, and fantastic job, Mauricio. I wanted to see if we could have a conversation with a group of SEAC volunteers. I know that, Aaron, you were at our meeting with 15 of the Hennepin County cities in St. Louis Park in January of 2020. We began to talk in small groups about actions that cities could do together. And so I know Hennepin County will be launching the implementation of their climate action plan here in 2022. So I would like to see, like, if we could find 2 or 3 SEAC volunteers and 1 or 2 staff from Minneapolis that could join up with some of their counterparts from other cities, because the scenario planning tool can be very helpful. Right now we have tremendous momentum that Minneapolis has helped with the commercial buildings efficiency efforts with the Hennepin County Efficient Buildings Collaborative. And it would be great if we could get a similar, momentum going related to residential efficiency, kind of tying in with implementing the inclusive financing. Also on the transportation side, Minneapolis wants to reduce VMT and so does Hennepin County. So having a number of cities using the scenario planning tools to come up with their top 3 to 5 actions they want to work on together related to transportation. I just think that it's going to be so much more powerful to do this scenario planning tool together with other cities, especially because it'll help some of the other bigger cities like Brooklyn Park, Maple Grove, Plymouth to kind of get momentum. So I'm wondering whether or not maybe, Aaron, you could promote that as an idea to find volunteers who want to join us in January to kind of look through shared scenario planning and action planning with Hennepin County cities related to residential. Go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, so Sean, I'll follow up with you via email after this meeting to figure out exactly what the ask is, and then send it around to different all SEAC members to see who might be able or willing to come to that meeting in January.
And then getting somebody from the staff like Kim or whoever who could be there too. Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Yep.
Thanks,
Anna?
Sean.
Thanks, Aaron. And thanks, Mauricio, for being here. It's good to see you. I appreciate the presentation. And this tool seems really, really useful. Just had a couple of quick questions. And I'm sorry if you said this and I missed it. But in terms of just like entry level to using the tool, like what do cities need to bring? Do they like, what's the sort of like data necessary to be able to take advantage of the tool? And then I'm also curious about the Met Council of Climate Action Planning and what sort of like public engagement, if you know, will be happening around that.
Yes, so cities don't need to bring any additional data. It's already has preloaded data about the electricity use and the natural gas use and the transport. In fact, one of the best data sources of transportation data is the Metropolitan Council, and that's part of the reason why we're doing this. We house a lot of like data to make this happen. So there's no like a lot of additional effort to see the tool working. Now, how to use the tool, I think that it really depends on what you're hoping to get from it. So if you're hoping to decide on a portfolio strategies, I think that that will have to be a process that involves stakeholders and involves the community and all that. But if you just wanted to evaluate your current plan and compare what's different alternatives, that you don't have to really do a lot for that. I think that there's that basic level of use, and there's the more advanced level of use where you actually grab the code that we wrote and you start like playing with the more like underlying assumptions. You maybe add strategies to this tool, or you modify the strategies that are currently available. And so, or one we see this more as a service that we're providing. That's a big thing here. It's not a tool that we're putting out and that's it. But really, it's going to be this dialogue with communities that we're going to continue to have. We're going to continue to add years to this so that this idea of scenario planning becomes kind of like more normalized, and we can continue to have conversations throughout the years and depending on how our progress is. to your question about the climate action plan, I know there's a component of external stakeholder engagement. I know that the timeline, at where we are in the timeline, we just hired a consultant to help us advance this work. Is Burrow Happold, a firm that has a really strong equity lens, and we're really interested in the environmental justice conversation as well. So when is the stakeholder engagement happening? I had to get back to you on that because there's not been like a public, you know, news statement or anything on the climate action plan. It's been mostly internally focused at this point, but I imagine there will be soon. So I will have to get back to you on that.
Great, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you for all the fantastic questions, and I'm really excited. Again, this is coming soon, and I'd love to hear your feedback. If you have any feedback for me, I can post my. Oh, I have another thing. I will put the YouTube link to the webinar, so there you can maybe forward to the section where the professors are talking, and I'm going to also include my email in the chat so we can have a dialogue. If you want to like talk more about this, we can continue that conversation.
Perfect.
And that's it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Really looking forward to using it more. Next up, we have some brief items for discussion, and so I'm going to hand it over to Kim for the first three.
Great, thank you, Erin. Just really quickly, thank you everyone for responding to the doodle poll. And the consensus from that is that the third Tuesday of the month from 5 to 7 is will be our normal calendar date. There may be a couple of changes, including in January, because I am going to be out of town for a little while until the 17th, and so I just need to be back in town to sort of get things prepped for the meeting. So we'll meet on the 25th of January, Tuesday the 25th. And right now we're planning to have the update on the mobility options, which will be the topic of our mobility hubs, as well as who the new electric bike and scooter partners are going to be rolling out next year. We did a partnership with the University of Minnesota and St. Paul on that. So I will be sending out Outlook, Outlook invites with the Teams meeting connection, which kind of leads into another piece that's right now the city council approved last week an extension of the mayoral proclamation of a emergency pandemic into mid-February. So that means I believe it's through February 13th, but that means that's very likely that I'm assuming we will be having a virtual meeting on January 25th. So let's just assume that's what we're doing until you hear differently.
For February.
Right, and then we'll figure it out for February, but there'll very likely be some kind of hybrid that we'll be able to take advantage of too, at least early on. Quickly on the update on the climate action equity plan, we have selected a consultant team to help us with the update of the climate action plan, and it's a local team, and we're very excited about it. We haven't finalized the contract, so I can't say specific names at this point, but big picture is that we'll work on laying out and agreeing to a work plan in January, February, and then start rolling into some community meetings. One of the things that we'll be looking for is an advisory group of 10 to 12 folks, in which I'd like to have a couple of people from SEAC participate in, along with some folks from Green Zones, and then there'll be city staff and some others. But I'd like to bring that forward maybe in January if I can, with a little bit more detail, but we'd love to have some folks from our SEAC commissioners to participate as the sort of core advisory team on the climate action and equity plan. So we'll have more to talk about that. And then thank you so much last month for forwarding recommendations on the fair share science-based GHG targets. Our plan is right now is I'll be introducing the concept at the new council member orientation on Monday, the 20th of December, and that we will be bringing forward the recommendation to the full council sometime in very early 2022 as the sort of kickoff to the Climate Action Equity Plan update, and sort of setting that as our clear bar and just sort of reemphasizing the plan as we move forward, just to have the official engagement of our new council and of course the city in general. So the overall plan is intended to be done and approved by the end of the first quarter of 2023. So it'll be about a year process. So lots of opportunities to engage on that. So I'll leave it to that. Of course, if folks have questions, feel free to email me or give me a call. I'll turn it back to Erin for the chair and vice chair nomination.
Yeah, so just as a reminder, per our bylaws, the second meeting of the new year, we end up holding elections for our chair and vice chair. And so we'll be asking for nominations for those positions at the January meeting and holding the election at the February meeting. So some of you might be wondering, what, especially those folks who are new on SEAC, what do the chair and vice chair do? In brief, the chair helps with setting the monthly agenda, connects with city staff in preparation for meetings, sends letters on behalf of the commission to city staff, council, or the mayor, depending on the topic. And the chair also facilitates the meetings, tries to keep the pace moving, and can call special meetings as needed. The vice chair assists as needed, filling in on any of the tasks above in cases where the chair is unable to fill their duties, which Anna has stepped up a lot this year, so I really appreciate that. Both positions are malleable. Past chairs and vice chairs have been more hands-on or off depending on their preferred leadership style, but start thinking about whether or not you want to run for chair or vice chair. I will not be running again as chair. I've been chair for the last 4 years. So really do consider running for that position. And as always, too, I'm happy to provide advice or support during that transition time, too. So if you really want to do it, but you're also feeling really nervous, feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to talk. Are there any other questions, updates, or topics for discussion that commissioners have as we wrap up? Hearing none. With that, just as a reminder that Kim will be out of the office on vacation from December 29th through January 17th. So if you do have any questions, you can reach out to Kim before that time. But if you have questions during that chunk that Kim is away, you can always reach staff at sustainability@minneapolismn.gov. And if there aren't any objections, I will declare this meeting adjourned. And as a reminder, our next SEAC meeting will be on Tuesday. Tuesday, January 25th, 2022 at 5 p.m.